The slap didn't echo. It didn't need to. It cut through the room like a blade, sharp enough to slice every conversation in half. For a moment, the entire 60-floor world of Astor and Crown simply stopped. Elena Rowan, though no one here knew that name, didn't stumble. She didn't gasp. She didn't even touch the cheek that had just been struck by Vivienne LaRoche. She simply lifted her gaze, slow and steady, until her eyes met the woman who'd hit her. And the restaurant held its breath. Astor and Crown wasn't the kind of place where scenes happened. Not here. Not under chandeliers worth more than a small house. Not in a dining room where every guest had a last name that could open governments. People didn't raise their voices in this room. They whispered, they signaled, they maneuvered, but they did not slap. And yet Vivienne LaRoche had just slapped a waitress in front of everyone. 30 seconds earlier, Elena had been finishing the final hour of her shift, bone-tired, running on the last traces of patience she'd kept tucked behind her polite smile. She'd survived worse days than this. She always did. She measured her breaths, counted her steps, moved like someone who understood that invisibility came from repetition, not stillness. If she was a shadow, she had learned long ago, no one would look for the person casting it. But tonight, fate didn't care about shadows. Table 17 was her last table of the night, reserved for two people whose arrival had already made the staff whisper in the kitchen. Adrian Blackwell, the quiet titan of the shipping world, and his fiancée, Vivienne, known for her impeccable wardrobe, sharper opinions, and the way she treated people she believed would never matter to her. Elena had served them twice before. She remembered the way Adrian always said, "Thank you," even when he barely looked up from his emails. And she remembered the way Vivienne demanded perfection in ways that weren't about the food, but about seeing whether the world still bent for her. Tonight, Vivienne wasn't just demanding, she was simmering with irritation, as if the whole room had personally disappointed her. "The garnish is wilted," she'd said earlier, though it wasn't. "This plate is too warm. This water tastes metallic. This bread is too soft." Every sentence had landed like a dropped pin, high-pitched, deliberate, meant to remind someone like Elena where she belonged. And still, Elena had smiled, always smiled. She approached the table again with a bottle of Bordeaux, steady hands, measured breath. She had poured wine thousands of times. She could do it blindfolded, she could do it in the dark, she could do it with her soul miles away from her body, and often she did. Tonight should have been no different, but Vivienne was talking with her hands, rings glittering, bracelets chiming lightly, as she reenacted a story about someone wearing the wrong designer to a winter gala. Adrian sat across from her, half listening, half scrolling through a document on his phone. Just as Elena angled the bottle, Vivienne's hand swept through the air, careless, dramatic, and brushed the back of Elena's wrist. The bottle jerked, not much, barely an inch, but enough. A single ruby dark drop lifted from the lip of the bottle and landed near the hem of Vivienne's ivory silk dress. It wasn't a splash, not even a stain, just a dot the size of a raindrop. But Vivienne froze as if she'd been stabbed. "You," her voice came out thin, breathless with offense. "You clumsy," Adrian finally looked up. "It was just a drop," he began. Vivienne cut him off. "Do you have any idea what this dress cost?" Her voice rose, jagged around the edges. "Do you think people like you can touch something like this without ruining it?" "Miss LaRoche," Elena said softly, "it was an accident. Allow me to—" "Don't speak." Vivienne stood so abruptly that her chair scraped against the marble. "Don't speak and don't touch me." Elena took a single step back, not from fear, from control. She'd had years of practice staying calm in the exact moments other people cracked. Vivienne's eyes flicked downward to the tiny droplet, and something inside her snapped. "You've ruined it," she hissed. "You've actually ruined it. Do you know what that means?" Elena started to apologize again, but Vivienne didn't want an apology. She wanted a spectacle. Her hand flew up, fingers tense, palm curved, and she slapped Elena across the face. The sound wasn't loud, but the shock was. The entire restaurant, every table, every server, every breath, fell still. Elena's cheek flushed instantly, a bloom of red spreading across her pale skin. Her hair shifted slightly from the impact. Her eyes closed for half a heartbeat. Then she opened them, and she lifted her head. For the first time that night, she truly looked at Vivienne, not as an employee, not as someone who had to endure whatever the world threw at her, but As someone who had survived 17 years of running, hiding, rebuilding, and outliving people far more dangerous than a woman in a gown, her gaze was steady, not defiant, not pleading, just steady, the kind of calm that made Vivian's breathing falter. Adrian stood halfway, hand braced on the table, eyes locked on Elena's face, on something familiar there, something he couldn't name yet, but suddenly couldn't look away from. Vivian, startled by the silence she'd created, tried to reclaim control. "Look at her," she snapped at the room. "This is what happens when you let people like her work in a place like this." No one moved, not even Elena, especially not Elena. She simply straightened, the empty wine bottle still balanced in her hand with a precision that belonged to someone who never allowed their world to shake, no matter who slapped them. And for the first time all evening, Vivian took a step back, because there was something in Elena's eyes she hadn't expected. Not submission, not fear, but a quiet power, as if Elena knew something Vivian didn't, something the rest of the room was seconds away from discovering. Adrian finally spoke. "Vivian," he said quietly, "enough," but it was already too late, because Elena's silence wasn't just silence. It was the beginning of a crack in the night, the kind of crack that, once started, never stops widening. And in that small fracture, in that tense stillness, the truth waiting beneath her borrowed name began to stir. None of them knew yet, not Vivian, not the restaurant, not even Adrian. But the woman they had just slapped was not the person they thought she was. And tonight was the night the world would find out. The silence didn't lift. If anything, it deepened, thickening around the tables, sinking into the velvet walls, turning every breath into something fragile and sharp. It was the kind of silence that follows a lightning strike. No one spoke. No one dared. And then the manager rushed in. Mr. Latham moved as though his entire career depended on reaching the table first, which, in his mind, it very much did. His polished shoes barely touched the floor as he wedged himself between Vivian and Elena, breath shallow, eyes wide with the panic of a man who had just witnessed a catastrophic breach in the social order of Astor and Crown. "Elena," he whispered sharply, "step back. Now." His voice trembled with a fury that wasn't his own. It was borrowed from the fear of losing wealthy patrons, of a viral scandal, of a world he had no power over except through obedience. Vivian seized the moment. "Finally," she said, folding her arms, "someone who understands the severity of what just happened." Her tone wasn't angry now. It was triumphant. She'd landed a blow, not just on Elena's cheek, but on her dignity, and she expected the room to reaffirm it. "Mr. Latham," Vivian continued, "this employee has no place in an establishment of this level. None. She can't even perform the simple task she's paid for without ruining an evening." "Miss LaRoche," Mr. Latham said quickly, "I assure you we will address this immediately. Elena," he turned to the young woman beside him, lowering his voice into an icy whisper, "you're finished. Hand me your apron." But Elena didn't move. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She didn't shrink away. She simply stood there, still, upright, strangely composed. And that composure unsettled everyone more than fear ever could. Vivian scoffed. "Look at her. She won't even apologize properly. It's astonishing someone like her was hired to begin with." Elena finally spoke, her voice low but steady, as if it came from someplace deeper than anger. "I did apologize, Miss LaRoche, and I would again, if that's what you needed, but the wine didn't spill because of negligence. It was an accident, that's all." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting this was my fault?" "No," Elena answered calmly. "I'm suggesting accidents happen, even here." That single sentence carried a weight the room couldn't quite explain. It wasn't defensive, it wasn't confrontational, it was controlled. Too controlled for someone who'd just been humiliated. And Adrian noticed. He'd been quiet since the slap, a still point in the chaos, watching. Not Elena's cheek, not Vivian's triumph, not even the frantic manager, but something else. Something shining just beneath Elena's collarbone, a small silver locket, oval-shaped, old, worn around the edges in a way that meant it had been touched often, held often, guarded often. He'd seen one exactly like it before. He leaned forward slightly, forgetting the tension, forgetting his fiancée standing beside him. "Elena," he said, almost under his breath, "that necklace." Elena didn't react, though she subtly shifted her hand to the locket, as if sensing his attention. Adrian's gaze sharpened, focused, trying to confirm something impossible. Vivienne noticed his distraction. "Adrian," she snapped, "do not defend her. This disaster is unforgivable." But he wasn't listening. He lifted his eyes from the necklace to Elena's face with a look Vivienne had never seen directed at anyone but her. Recognition? No. Something stranger. Something searching. "Elena," he said, more clearly this time, "may I see that locket for a moment?" Mr. Latham blanched. "Sir, with respect, she needs to leave the dining floor now before this escalates." But Adrian didn't even acknowledge him. His attention was locked on Elena. Elena hesitated, just for the briefest flicker of a second, then slowly wrapped her fingers around the silver pendant. Her expression didn't change, but her posture did, slightly, as if preparing for something. "I'd prefer to keep it on," she replied quietly. Vivienne's jaw dropped. "You're refusing a request from my fiancé? Are you out of your mind?" Adrian's voice sharpened. "Vivienne." In that single word was a warning, and she fell silent. The entire room felt the shift. Adrian turned back to Elena. "That locket," he said. "Where did you get it?" Elena blinked once. "It was a gift." "From whom?" Her eyes didn't move, didn't flinch. "Someone who meant a great deal to me." Adrian's heartbeat quickened in a way he didn't understand. He had seen that exact locket when he was a teenager, held in the palm of Eleanor Rowan, the brilliant and gentle founder of Rowan Logistics. She'd shown it to him on the day she made him promise one thing. "If anything ever happens to me, help the one who inherits this." He hadn't understood then, but he remembered the locket perfectly. "Elena?" His voice softened, nearly reverent. "What's your full name?" The question struck the table like the second tremor after an earthquake. Vivienne stiffened. Mr. Latham's mouth fell open. The servers froze mid-step. Elena inhaled slowly, as if the air itself had thickened, and looked him directly in the eyes. "My name," she said, "is Elena." He waited. "And your surname?" She paused, not dramatically, but carefully, like someone stepping onto a surface they weren't sure would hold their weight. "I go by Rowan," she finally answered. "Elena Rowan." It was subtle, just the faintest lift of Adrian's brow, the smallest shift in his expression, but it was enough to send a current through his entire body. Rowan. That name had been buried for nearly 15 years. Announced dead, erased from every record, silenced by tragedy, sealed by power. Vivienne paled. "You, Rowan?" She laughed, thin and brittle. "You expect us to believe that? That's absurd. The Rowan heir died years ago. Everyone knows that." Elena didn't respond. She didn't have to, because Adrian was no longer looking at Vivienne. He was looking at Elena's face, really looking, reshaping old memories, re-examining faint recollections he'd buried long ago. The last time he'd seen Eleanor Rowan alive, she'd held the hand of a little girl with dark eyes and a quiet, thoughtful expression, eyes that looked a lot like the ones standing before him now. "Elena," he murmured, "how old are you?" 26. "And the locket? Was it given to you before or after your mother passed?" Elena's breath caught, not visibly, but enough that Adrian noticed. "Before," she said softly. Vivienne looked between them, her confusion turning into something sharp. "Adrian, stop this. She's clearly manipulating." But Adrian spoke over her, his tone low and steady. "You remind me of someone," he told Elena. "Someone I knew long ago." Elena's eyes softened just a fraction, the first crack in her guarded calm. "And you," she whispered, "remind me of a promise." For a heartbeat, neither spoke. And in that fragile pause, the truth, still unspoken, pressed closer to the surface. The heir who was supposed to be dead was standing in front of him, and the locket was all the proof he needed. Adrian didn't speak, neither did Elena, but something had shifted, subtly, quietly, like a door unlocking deep within a house no one had entered in years. The air seemed to thicken, becoming heavier, almost fragile. For a moment, the entire world narrowed to the small silver locket resting against Elena's collarbone. And then the story inside that locket began to rise. Not in words, not in explanations, but in memory. Before the wine, before the slap, before Elena learned how to make herself invisible, there was a girl standing beside a woman with the softest hands she'd ever known. Eleanor Rowan, founder of Rowan Logistics, architect of an empire that changed global trade, a woman whose mind could redraw the map of the world while still remembering every birthday of every employee's child. She had been brilliant, yes, but more than that, she had been kind. And Elena remembered her kindness most of all. She remembered the way Eleanor knelt down to her level when she spoke, how she smelled faintly of cedar and lemon balm, how her laugh filled every room like warm light. And she remembered the airport. The memory came back to Elena like a tide returning, not gentle but unstoppable. She had been 11. The airport was quiet in the early morning, rows of empty seats, glass walls reflecting the pale blue of sunrise, the hum of distant engines warming up for flights that would carry thousands of lives across the sky. Eleanor Rowan held her daughter's shoulders, her eyes tired in a way Elena, at 11, didn't understand. "Elena," she whispered, brushing a loose strand of hair away from her daughter's face, "I need you to listen to me carefully." The girl nodded, clutching the strap of her backpack. "I have to take a trip," Eleanor said. "A short one. Just 2 days. But you're going somewhere else first." "Where?" Elena asked. Eleanor hesitated. "To stay with Aunt Miriam for a little while." Aunt Miriam wasn't truly an aunt, just Eleanor's closest friend, a woman with a gentle voice who always smelled like vanilla and worked as a quiet archivist in a university library. Elena liked her. But something about this morning felt different, wrong. "Why can't I come with you?" she asked. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. "Because," she said softly, "I don't feel safe taking you with me right now." Those words shouldn't have made sense to a child, but they did. Elena felt them land somewhere deep, somewhere instinctive. "Did someone hurt you?" she whispered. "No," Eleanor said quickly, forcing a smile, "but I've made powerful decisions recently, and not everyone agrees with them. This is just a precaution." She didn't say the rest out loud. "I think they're coming for me." Instead, she slipped a small velvet pouch into Elena's hands. Inside, wrapped in soft fabric, was the silver locket, the very one hanging around Elena's neck now. Eleanor knelt and cupped her daughter's face. "This belonged to your grandmother," she said, "and to her mother before that. It's more than jewelry. It's a symbol of the Rowan line." Elena traced the tiny engraved key on its surface, the detail so fine it seemed to shimmer. "Never take it off," Eleanor whispered. "Not for anyone." Then she reached into her pocket again and pulled out a thin red string, woven into a bracelet, frayed at the ends but carefully knotted. "I made this for you," Eleanor said, tying it around Elena's wrist. "If you ever feel lost, look at it and remember who you are." "Who am I?" the girl asked, barely above a whisper. Eleanor took a shaky breath. "You're my daughter, my heir, and everything I've built belongs to you." Elena didn't understand the gravity of those words, not then, not even years later, but she remembered how tightly her mother held her, how Eleanor's fingers trembled when she kissed her forehead. She remembered the final hug. And she remembered watching Eleanor walk through the security gate, turning back once, just once, to smile at her daughter with a sadness that made the airport feel colder than winter. That was the last time Elena ever saw her mother alive. 24 hours later, the plane carrying Eleanor Rowan crashed in the mountains outside Vancouver. It was ruled a mechanical malfunction, but journalists whispered, employees whispered, skeptics whispered, and Charles Rowan, the grieving brother, stepped forward to guide the company through tragedy. He announced that Eleanor's daughter had also been lost in the crash, that there were no surviving heirs, that he would temporarily lead the Rowan empire until further notice. But no one questioned it. Not the board, not the shareholders, not the world. Because a story told with enough confidence becomes truth for those too far away to see the details. And the only person who knew the truth, Aunt Miriam, died in a house fire 3 years later. Elena survived because she was out buying groceries. After that, there was no record of her. No guardian, no family, no paper trail, just a girl with a silver locket, a bracelet of red thread, and a name she could no longer use. She became Elena Shore, then Elle Rivers, then finally Elena Rowan again, quietly, only to herself. She worked wherever she could. She lived in small apartments under cash-only leases. She learned how to vanish into every place she entered. She learned how to survive alone, but she never let go of the locket. And she never took off the bracelet. Those two items were the only pieces left of her mother, of her life, of who she truly was. The memory dissolved as Adrian exhaled slowly, his eyes fixed on the locket as if he'd seen a ghost. Elena didn't say anything. She simply let the truth hang between them, unsaid but unmistakable. Vivian, noticing the quiet intensity passing between them, let out an uneasy laugh. "What is happening right now? Are you seriously entertaining this? Adrian, don't be absurd." But he didn't answer her. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze still locked on Elena, not with suspicion, not with disbelief, but with something far more dangerous: recognition. "Elena," he said quietly, "your mother, what was her name?" Elena swallowed. "Eleanor," she said. "Eleanor Rowan." Vivian went pale, Mr. Latham gasped softly, and Adrian felt his pulse, quicken with the weight of a truth he'd never expected to see resurface. The heir wasn't dead. She'd been here the whole time, carrying a locket, wearing a red thread bracelet, serving wine in a restaurant built for the wealthy, waiting for the moment her past would finally stop running from her. And that moment had come. For most people, a slap was the end of a night. For Elena Rowan, it was the beginning of one, because she hadn't walked into Astor and Crown by accident. She had chosen it. Precision, calculation, 8 months of patience disguised as routine shifts and quiet smiles. The truth was simple. Astor and Crown wasn't a restaurant to her. It was a vantage point, a place where powerful people came believing they were unseen, a place where secrets dripped more carelessly than wine. And she had returned to this place, returned to this city, not as a lost heir or a grieving daughter or a girl running from shadows. She returned as a shadow herself. Long before the slap, before Vivian's insult, before Adrian recognized the locket, Elena had stood alone behind the restaurant's walk-in cooler, holding a small notebook in her hand. A battered, brown, spiral-bound notebook, the only thing she kept close besides the locket. On its first page was a date. 8 months ago. That was when her plan began. It started on a quiet Tuesday. Astor and Crown had closed for a private event. Elena, new and anonymous, carried trays and polished crystal while pretending not to hear the conversations around her. But she heard everything. Vivian's sharp voice, Charles Rowan's colder one, the metallic clink of their glasses, and the careless confidence of people who believed no one around them mattered. "Adrian admires stability," Charles said that night, swirling his drink. "He won't marry into a mess. You need to act like everything is under control." Vivian scoffed. "I've done everything I'm supposed to. He trusts me. His board trusts me. When the merger is settled, Rowan Shipping becomes untouchable." "Astor and Crown is the perfect meeting place," Charles murmured. "No reporters, no leaks." Elena walked past their table, placing a bottle of sparkling water without a sound. Neither of them looked up. Neither of them suspected. Neither of them cared. But Elena did. She cared enough to write every word down later that night in her notebook. Over the next weeks, she noticed patterns. Vivian always ordered the same drink when she was anxious, a lavender gin cocktail she stirred too many times. Charles always arrived late, always looking over his shoulder, and every conversation carried the same theme: desperation disguised as strategy. Sometimes it was numbers. "We're bleeding money, Vivian. Do you understand that? Bleeding." Sometimes it was pressure. "You need to secure Adrian's confidence before the quarter ends." Sometimes it was fear. If anything surfaces about the offshore accounts, everything collapses. Elena never reacted. She never looked twice. She simply served water, cleared tables, and wrote everything down later in the quiet of the supply room. Page after page, names, dates, payments, unusual transfers, odd meetings, arguments that ended in silence so sharp she felt it in her bones. And then, one night, she heard the worst one. Vivian's whisper, a little too loud in her frustration. "If Adrian finds out what Charles did to the emergency fund, he'll pull the deal. And without that, your empire falls. Both of ours fall. Empire falls." Elena remembered staring at the stainless steel of the prep counter, wondering how many years her mother's dream had been strangled in boardrooms she never got to witness. Someone had stolen more than money. Someone had stolen her birthright, and she would take it back. Not through revenge, not through rage, but through truth. The kind that doesn't need shouting, just timing. Her evidence grew like a hidden constellation. Receipts of private dinners, copies of reservation logs, photos of whispered conversations taken with her phone angled correctly in the reflection of a wine bottle. An overheard threat. A tearful confession. Vivian didn't know Elena had heard from the hallway of the powder room. 8 months, 200 pages, 47 audio notes saved under aliases. One near-perfect map of a corporate collapse planned by people who didn't know she existed, or so they believed. Elena was a ghost moving through their world, a presence they never noticed, and that was her advantage. But Adrian's role in her plan had never been part of her intention, at least not initially. She had studied him from afar, his interviews, his decisions, the way he handled conflict. He wasn't like Charles. He wasn't ruthless for gain. He was intelligent, guarded, deeply observant, and he was the one man Charles desperately needed. Not just for marriage into Vivian's family, not just for the merger, but because Adrian's company provided the financial spine that kept Rowan Global afloat. Without him, Charles had nothing. No leverage, no credibility, no empire, and Vivian knew it, which was why she played the role of devoted fiancée so flawlessly until the role began to crack. Elena saw the cracks first. Vivian's impatience, her phone calls behind closed doors, her late-night return visits to Astor and Crown with strangers Adrian never met. Elena kept documenting until she finally understood the whole picture. Charles had diverted millions. Vivian was hiding the traces, and together they planned to secure Adrian's signature before the quarterly audit exposed everything. If Vivian married into the Blackwell family, Charles bought time. If Adrian rejected her, Rowan Global collapsed overnight. The world would call it mismanagement. Elena knew it for what it was, a corruption that had killed her mother, and now threatened to bury her mother's legacy forever. So, Elena waited. Every night, every shift, every moment she served water or poured wine. She waited for the moment when truth would come to light, not through force, but through inevitability. Then, tonight, it happened. A single drop of wine, a spark of arrogance, a slap heard across the restaurant. Vivian had handed Elena the perfect moment without realizing it, because secrets thrive in silence until someone breaks it. And Elena felt something in her crack open the second Vivian's palm struck her cheek. Not pain, not humiliation, purpose. The moment she'd been waiting for had arrived. Everything she collected, every page in her notebook, every risk she took, it all converged in an instant. Adrian's eyes on her locket, the whisper of her real name on his lips, the shift in the room as the past seeped into the present. The air was no longer hidden, and the people who had stolen her life didn't know it yet. Elena straightened her apron, not a servant, not a ghost, a Rowan, finally stepping out of the shadows. For a few seconds after the slap, Astor and Crown forgot how to breathe. The music died mid-note. Conversations collapsed into silence. Glasses trembled slightly on their stems, as if even the crystal sensed something irreversible had just happened. Vivian stood over Elena like she had won some petty battle, her hand still hovering in the air, as if admiring its own cruelty. But it was the next moment, the moment she opened her mouth, that detonated the room. "You really are nothing," she spat. "A mistake dressed like a person. And now you've ruined my night, my dress, my patience." Vivian. Adrian didn't raise his voice, but the way he said her name froze her mid-breath. He stood slowly, like someone rising from a long calculation, his gaze fixed not on Vivian, but on Elena. Something unreadable, unnerving, flickered in his eyes. "Apologize," he said. Vivian blinked. "What?" "Apologize to her." She let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Adrian, love, you're not being serious. She spilled on me. She put her hands on my dress. And you hit her." Adrian's tone sharpened. "In front of a full restaurant. In front of me." Vivian waved him off. "It's a staff problem. People like her know mistakes have consequences." Elena lifted her chin with quiet composure, but she didn't speak. Adrian stepped forward. "This isn't about a mistake. It's about how you treat people." Vivian's voice thinned with disbelief. "You're defending her? A server? Adrian, this is ridiculous. Sit down." He didn't. Instead, his eyes dropped to Elena's collarbone, specifically the small silver locket that had slipped from beneath her apron during the confrontation. A circle of engraved silver, a tiny key, the unmistakable Rowan crest woven into the metal. Adrian froze, His breath left him in a way that made the entire table feel colder. "Elena?" he whispered, his voice trembling for the first time. "Where did you get that?" Elena said nothing. Vivian rolled her eyes. "Oh, this again? It's just cheap jewelry, probably a thrift store find." "It's not cheap," Adrian said sharply. He reached out slightly, as though afraid the locket might vanish if he moved too fast. "This symbol," he murmured. "This design. It belonged to Eleanor Rowan." The whisper scraped through the restaurant like the first crack of thunder before a storm. Vivian pulled at his sleeve, frantic now. "Adrian, stop this. It's a trinket. It's nothing." But Adrian didn't look away. He lowered his voice, though the entire room could hear the tremor in it. That locket was handcrafted. Only 2 were ever made, one for Eleanor and one for her child. His throat tightened. Her heir. The word hung in the air like a match above gasoline. Finally, Elena spoke. Her voice was low, steady, and sharper than any blade. "It's exactly where it belongs." The chaos in Adrian's expression was immediate, recognition colliding with disbelief, memory colliding with revelation. He had known Eleanor. He had been there when the press announced her death. He had been there when Charles declared her entire line extinguished. He remembered the day he attended Eleanor's memorial, the speeches, the boardroom politics cloaked as condolences, the coldness in Charles's unwavering claim. There were no survivors. But now, a server at a restaurant, a quiet, unremarkable woman with tired eyes and a locket he had only ever seen in the Rowan vault, was looking at him with a gaze that felt like a mirror held to a lie. Vivian tugged harder at Adrian's arm, desperation replacing irritation. "Adrian, enough. You're embarrassing yourself. Let's leave." He didn't move. Instead, he asked the question that had been gathering in him since the moment the light struck the locket. "What's your last name?" A hush spread across the restaurant, so wide and deep it felt like the floor itself leaned in to listen. Elena held his gaze. "Why does that matter?" "Because," Adrian breathed, "I need to know if I've just watched someone strike a Rowan." Vivian recoiled. "This is insane. You're letting a piece of jewelry and a—" "Vivian!" Adrian's voice cut through her like a closed door. "Enough!" The room watched her freeze, stunned that someone had finally told her that. He turned to Elena again, gentler now. "Please, tell me." For a moment, Elena seemed torn between 2 worlds, the one she'd built to survive and the one that had been stolen from her blood. But then she inhaled, slowly, like someone preparing to climb out of a long, dark tunnel. "My name," she said, "is Elena." She paused. Not Elena Shore, the alias on her pay stub. Not L. Rivers, the name she used on old leases. Not the fabricated identities she'd tucked inside worn envelopes. Just Elena. "Where did you get that locket?" Adrian pressed softly. Her voice barely moved the air. "My mother gave it to me," Vivian scoffed, panic bleeding into her voice. "You expect us to believe that? Adrian, do not let this girl manipulate you. She wants attention, that's all." But the more she protested, the clearer it became that she was frightened. Deeply, profoundly frightened. Adrian didn't look at her. He whispered, "Your mother, what was her name?" The question was a door, opening, inviting, demanding truth with the weight of a lifetime behind it. Elena swallowed, her throat tight, her eyes flickering not with fear but with something older, grief sharpened into purpose. "Eleanor," she said quietly, "Eleanor Rowan." Vivian's face drained of color. Adrian's hand trembled slightly where it rested on the table. Someone at a nearby table gasped, and in that instant the truth broke open like glass shattering under a heel. The Rowan heir was not dead. She had not vanished. She was standing in front of them, alive, breathing, and wearing the locket meant to identify the only person Eleanor had ever trusted with the future of her empire. Vivian stumbled back a step, unable to disguise her fear. Adrian whispered, barely audible, "My God." But Elena didn't bask in the shock. She didn't gloat. She didn't tremble. She simply lifted her chin and said quietly, "You've all known a version of the story. Now you're about to hear the truth." And the storm that swept through Astor and Crown had only just begun. For a moment, everything inside Astor and Crown felt weightless, like the room itself was deciding whether to collapse or explode. Adrian stared at Elena as if seeing a ghost step out of a photograph he'd kept locked in a drawer for years. Vivian's eyes stared at Adrian, fear shimmering beneath her outrage. And Elena? Elena stood quiet, steady, the silver locket catching the warm light like a silent confession. It was Vivian who broke first. "Adrian, this has gone too far." Her voice wavered despite her attempt at control. "You don't know this woman. She's manipulating you. That locket—" "Vivian," he said without looking at her. "Stop." Those two words, so calm, so final, made her flinch as if he'd physically pushed her back into her chair. He turned fully toward Elena. "Tell me," he said, his voice low. "I need the truth. All of it. Who are you really?" For a heartbeat, Elena considered him, not with fear, not with hesitation, but with the measured silence of someone who had carried the weight of a secret far heavier than her own life. Instead of answering him directly, she asked softly, "Why do you think I wasn't lost?" The question landed like a stone dropped into a frozen lake, cracking everything beneath the surface. Adrian blinked. "What?" "You asked me about the locket," Elena said. "You recognized it. You knew where it came from. So, tell me, why did you think it survived? Why did you believe someone else carried it?" He swallowed. "Elena, that locket belonged to Eleanor Rowan's child. Everyone believed. Charles announced—" "Yes," Elena said. "He announced what the world needed to hear." Vivian's breath hitched. "Adrian," she snapped sharply, "none of this makes sense. She's playing games. She's spinning a story to save her job." "No," said Adrian quietly. "She's not." His voice had changed. It carried something new, something heavy with memory. "Elena," he murmured, "your mother trusted so few people. She kept her circle small. Her decisions, her fears, she shared them only when she had no other choice." His eyes unfocused slightly, as if looking back in time. "A week before her flight, she came to my office. She told me she felt watched, followed, pressured from within her own board." Elena's jaw locked. Adrian exhaled shakily. "And she said something I never understood until now. She said, 'If anything happens to me, protect my daughter.'" Vivian's chair scraped loudly against the floor as she shot to her feet. "Adrian, absolutely not. You cannot possibly believe. This is absurd. Eleanor's daughter died. Everyone knows that." "Everyone knows what Charles told them," Elena replied calmly. Vivian spun toward the nearest staff member. "Where is your manager? Get him, now! This woman is disturbing the peace. She's causing a scene." Adrian slammed his palm lightly, but firmly, onto the table. "Vivian," she froze mid-sentence. "Sit. Down." The command wasn't loud, but it resonated through the room like a gavel falling. Vivian refused at first, her lips trembling, but when Adrian turned and looked at her, really looked at her, she sat. Her voice shrank. "You can't let her do this. She's trying to sabotage us." Adrian ignored her. He leaned closer to Elena, his expression a mixture of dread and hope. "Answer me," he said quietly. "Please." Elena's gaze softened, not with vulnerability, but with weary honesty. "My mother had very few people she trusted," she said. "She predicted someone close would betray her. She took precautions. And before she boarded that plane—" Elena touched the locket lightly. "She made her final choice." Adrian's breath caught. "Me," he whispered. "She trusted me." "Yes," Elena said. Vivian shook her head violently. "This is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Adrian, she's lying. Eleanor didn't trust you that much. She didn't trust anyone that much." Elena turned her gaze to Vivian. "No," she said evenly. "She didn't trust everyone that much, but she trusted him." Vivian stood again, now visibly shaking. "I'm getting the manager. I'm not staying here to listen to some fantasy." She whirled around, but stopped when Adrian said quietly, "If you walk away right now, I'll know exactly why you're afraid." Vivian froze like her body had been turned to stone. Slowly she turned back to face him. What are you talking about?" "You knew Charles," Adrian said, voice calm but cutting. "You knew the Rowan family. You knew the rumors. And you knew Eleanor feared someone inside the company." His gaze narrowed. "So, why does this bother you so much? Why are you terrified of her story?" "I'm not terrified," she snapped, voice cracking. "I just don't want you falling for the truth?" Elena asked softly. Vivian paled. Adrian stepped between them, placing himself unconsciously in front of Elena as if protecting her from further attack. "Tell me," he said again to Elena. "Please, I need to understand." Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she asked, "When Charles announced that Eleanor and her daughter died, did you believe him?" The question cut deeper than he expected. "No," he admitted. Something felt wrong. Eleanor never traveled without her daughter. Never. And they were not on the manifest together. I saw the document myself. Her child wasn't listed. I asked Charles why. He said... Adrian closed his eyes, remembering. He said she was sick, that she stayed with a caretaker. Elena nodded. A lie he needed the world to accept. Adrian opened his eyes slowly. And the caretaker? Died in a fire 3 years later, Elena said. Conveniently. Vivienne let out a strangled sound. Adrian, don't you see? She knew that detail because it's public. It was in the papers. No, it wasn't, Adrian said flatly. That fire was never reported. Only the board knew. Vivienne's lips trembled. I don't... He turned back to Elena, voice barely audible. Your mother... What were her last words to you? Elena inhaled sharply. For the first time that night, grief flickered across her face. Not performative, not theatrical, but ancient and real. She told me, Elena whispered, that she loved me, and that the world would try very hard to pretend I never existed. Adrian's breathing stopped. Vivienne's hands clutched the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles went white, and the room, every single guest, every server, every passerby, fell into a silence so deep it became its own kind of gravity. Adrian's voice cracked as he spoke. Elena, if what you say is true... She met his gaze with a quiet, devastating certainty. It is. Vivienne pushed back her chair suddenly, panic splintering her composure. No, this is not happening. Adrian, get her out. Get her fired. Now. The manager arrived breathless from across the room, confused and anxious. Is there a problem at this table? Miss Vivienne, are you... Vivienne pointed at Elena with a trembling hand. Remove her, right now. But Adrian stepped forward, placing his hand on the table, with a finality that silenced everyone. No one is removing her. Vivienne stared at him, horrified. Adrian, she whispered, why are you defending her? His answer was quiet, devastating. Because, he said, I think I finally understand who she is. For one suspended second, it felt as if time itself pulled in a breath. The waitstaff stood frozen mid-step. The chandeliers above flickered as though reacting to the tension below. The murmurs of wealthy patrons died one by one until the entire restaurant felt like a single beating heart, waiting to hear what Adrian Blackwell would say next. And then he erupted. No one touches her! The sound cracked through Astor and Crown like a thunderbolt. Every head snapped toward table 17. The manager stumbled back. Vivienne flinched so hard the ring on her hand clattered against the table. Elena alone stayed still, unmoving, unblinking, her silence carrying the weight of someone who had learned, long ago, that storms reveal truth faster than calm ever could. Adrian stepped between her and Vivienne, jaw locked, shoulders squared. It was the stance of a man who had made up his mind. She is not leaving this restaurant, he said, voice low, but ringing with absolute authority. Not now, not ever, not until the truth is acknowledged. A ripple of whispers broke through the room, thin and sharp. What truth? What is he talking about? Is that her locket? Could it be? Vivienne raised both hands as if warding off a nightmare. Adrian, stop this. Please, stop embarrassing yourself. She's a server, a nobody. She spilled on me. She is Elena Rowan. The sentence did not simply land. It detonated. Gasps shot through the restaurant in a single wave. Utensils clattered. A couple at the corner table stood up so abruptly their chairs toppled backward. Someone whispered, trembling, Rowan? The Rowan child? But she died, didn't she? Elena didn't speak. Adrian's voice grew steadier with every word. She is the daughter of Eleanor Rowan, the real heir, the one Charles Rowan claimed was lost. More gasps. A few people instinctively covered their mouths. A man near the bar dropped his phone, which hit the marble floor with a sharp crack no one bothered to pick up. Vivienne staggered backward until her spine pressed against the wall. That's impossible, she whispered. It's impossible. He's lying. She's lying. Eleanor died. Her daughter died. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows what Charles told them, Adrian said. Vivian shook her head wildly. No, no, this can't be happening. Adrian, you cannot stand there and pretend she is... Look at the locket, he said simply. All eyes shifted to the small silver pendant lying against Elena's collarbone. A soft glow fell over it from the chandeliers above. In that quiet, almost sacred light, the Rowan crest etched into its surface gleamed like it had been waiting for this moment all along. Several patrons gasped again, this time in recognition. I've seen that before. It was on the news. They showed it after the plane crash, didn't they? Yes. Eleanor was photographed holding it at a charity gala, and she said it belonged to her daughter who supposedly died. One man, older and sharp-eyed, leaned forward as if seeing a miracle. My God, he breathed. It's the heirloom, the actual heirloom. Vivian's knees buckled. No, 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 please. Her voice broke into a whispering panic. I didn't know. I swear, Adrian, I didn't know. She can't be, but she was. And the realization gutted her faster than any slap could have done. Her world, her engagement, her plans, her whispered promises to Charles was collapsing in real time, and she was powerless to stop it. The manager tried to salvage control, his voice thin and shaking. Mr. Blackwell, sir, I don't think we can allow... You will allow this, Adrian cut in. You will stand exactly where you are and listen. His stare silenced the entire staff. Then he turned back to Elena with an expression that was something between awe and heartbreak. When I first met Eleanor, he said, she wore that exact locket. She touched it every time she talked about her child. She said it was the symbol of her legacy, the key to the future she dreamed of building. He exhaled, the truth settling heavily across his shoulders. And seeing it now, on you, feels like the universe correcting a lie. Elena's eyes flickered, not with triumph, not with fear, but with the restrained emotion of someone who'd carried too many secrets for too many years. She spoke quietly. I didn't come here to reveal myself. I know, Adrian said, but you didn't need to, because the truth was always going to rise. Vivian clutched the back of a chair, her nails digging into the fabric. This isn't fair, she whispered hoarsely. You can't do this to me. Adrian, you can't believe her. You can't throw everything away because of a server with a story and a necklace. Adrian turned slowly to face her, and the emptiness in his eyes shattered what little composure she had left. You didn't slap a server, Adrian said. You struck the rightful heir of the Rowan dynasty, and you insulted the daughter of a woman I respected more than almost anyone in my life. Vivian's throat closed. Adrian continued, voice steady but cold. And the marriage deal, the merger, the future you thought you were walking into? He shook his head. It's gone, completely. She covered her mouth with trembling fingers. You can't mean that, she whispered. Please, Adrian, please. But he had already turned back to Elena, his eyes filled with a gravity the room felt but didn't fully understand. Elena, he said softly, if you truly are who I think you are, then the world has been waiting for you. The restaurant fell silent again, this time with reverence, not shock. Elena held his gaze, her voice steady enough to tremble the air. I didn't choose this moment, she said, but I won't run from it. And in the stunned quiet of Astor and Crown, surrounded by people who had unknowingly witnessed history rewriting itself, Adrian Blackwell declared the truth aloud. She is Elena Rowan. The heir returned, the lie undone, the storm unleashed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The fallout from Adrian's declaration still rippled across Astor and Crown when he turned sharply toward Vivian. His voice, usually controlled and measured, carried a sudden edge that cut through the stunned silence. Vivian, he said, I have a question. Vivian's breath came in shallow bursts, panic smothering her composure. Adrian, please, not here, not like this. 2 days ago, Adrian continued, Charles Rowan arrived in the city, quietly, no press, no public schedule, no meetings logged with the board. His gaze pierced through her. Why didn't you tell me? Vivian's face drained of color. I didn't know, she whispered. I had no idea he was here. Adrian stepped closer, his tone steady but lethal. You're lying. You always know when he's here. He never moves without informing you. I'm telling the truth, she cried. I haven't spoken to him in weeks. Elena finally spoke. That's not accurate. Vivian whipped around, eyes wide. You stay out of this. Elena's expression didn't change. She simply stood there as if unraveling a rope that had been coiled tightly for months. 8 nights ago, Elena said, you were sitting right there. She pointed to a corner booth. You took a call from Charles Rowan. You lowered your voice, but not enough. You told him, the timeline is still on track. The day of the merger will fix everything. A murmur rippled across the room. Adrian's eyes darkened. Merger? Vivian shook her head violently. No, I never said that. She's making this up, Elena continued, unbothered. You also said, he trusts me completely. Once the wedding is done, the access is ours. Vivian's knees trembled. That's not true, she insisted, voice cracking. It's not true. I didn't say that. I didn't... Vivian, Adrian said quietly, only someone involved in the deal would use the word access. She froze. Access to what? He asked, though he already knew. Vivian's silence was the answer. Patrons who had been watching the scene like a slow-burning theater play leaned forward, eyes wide. Someone whispered, this is a takeover plot. Another murmured, Charles Rowan. Of course he'd do something like this. Vivian clasped her hands in front of her chest as if trying to hold her world together. Adrian, please, you're letting her twist things. She's doing this to destroy us, to destroy me. Elena tilted her head slightly. No, she said softly. I didn't need to twist anything. You did that yourself. Vivian snapped. You think you know everything? She shouted, her voice rising unnaturally high. You think you're some brilliant hidden heiress who can just walk in here and... Vivian. Adrian's voice dropped like a blade. Answer her. What? Answer Elena. Did you speak to Charles 8 nights ago? Vivian swallowed hard. I may have taken a call, but it wasn't what she's implying. What was it then? Adrian pressed. I don't remember, Elena responded before Adrian could. You described the wedding as a business transaction. You said, once the ceremony's done, we'll both finally breathe. Gasps echoed through the room. Vivian blinked in horror, because that line, that exact inflection, belonged to a conversation no one else should have known. How would she... Vivian's voice faltered. How could she remember something like that? Elena met her gaze. Because I was standing behind you, holding a tray of empty glasses. Vivian stared at her, as if seeing her for the first time. Not as a server, not as someone beneath her, but as the quiet witness she had never accounted for. A witness she should have feared. A witness she had struck. Adrian stepped back slowly, his eyes widening as pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. You and Charles planned the wedding, he murmured. It wasn't about us. It was never about us. Vivian's face crumpled. Adrian, no. It was a merger, he said. A merger between my family and the remains of the Rowan Empire. A marriage of convenience, a chess move. Vivian burst into tears. I didn't want it to be like that. Charles told me. He told me it was just business, that everything would be fine once we were married. He said the Rowan estate was collapsing, that if we secured the assets... Secured? Elena repeated softly. Is that what you call it? Vivian sobbed harder. Charles said you needed me, Adrian. He said you were lost after your mother died. He said you would thank me one day. Adrian's expression hardened. So, this entire engagement, Adrian said, each word slow and devastating, was a deal brokered between Charles Rowan and you. Vivian's shoulders shook. I wanted to tell you. I did. But Charles said if I told you too soon, he'd lose his leverage, Elena finished. Vivian's hands shot to her mouth. She hadn't said that part aloud. Not tonight. Not ever. Adrian stared at her, as if a screen had been lifted from the last year of his life, revealing the truth he should have seen sooner. You used me, he whispered. Vivian reached for him, desperate. No, please, Adrian. It wasn't like that. There were feelings, real feelings. I wanted us to work. But you were helping Charles steal everything Eleanor built, Elena said. Everything she died protecting. Vivian shook her head violently. I didn't know. I didn't know he was planning anything illegal. He told me it was just a restructuring, Elena interrupted gently. You knew enough. Vivian broke down, her sobs echoing off marble and glass. Adrian stepped back another inch, not out of cruelty, but out of finality. A quiet, irreversible boundary had been drawn. You didn't care about me, he said softly. You cared about access. Vivian sank into the nearest chair, hands shaking uncontrollably. Elena, Adrian said suddenly, turning to her. How long have you known? 8 months, she answered, long enough to understand what the wedding represented, and long enough to know that Charles Rowan's reach didn't end with a plane crash. A heavy silence swallowed the restaurant. Vivian cried harder. Adrian's face was stone. Elena's expression held no triumph, only truth. Across the room, someone whispered what everyone else was now thinking. She wasn't just hiding, she was investigating. And for the first time, Vivian realized something more terrifying than all the rest. She hadn't slapped a server. She had assaulted the one person capable of exposing everything she and Charles had built their scheme upon. The Rowan heir, the last piece of a dynasty she was never meant to cross. And the woman who could unravel her entire world with a single sentence. The atmosphere inside Astor and Crown had shifted from shock to something darker, something electric. A truth that had been buried for 15 years was now rising, and the collapse of an empire was happening in real time, under warm chandeliers and half-finished plates of sea bass. Adrian didn't wait. He turned toward the room, toward every patron, every witness, every camera discreetly raised, and spoke with a clarity that carried like a bell. This doesn't end here, he said. Not in this restaurant, not in the dark. What Charles Rowan has done, and what he attempted to do, will be brought to the SEC and the Attorney General's office immediately. A collective breath swept across the room. Vivian made a choked sound, half sob, half protest. Adrian, please, you can't do this publicly. You made it public, he said. When you struck her, when you lied, when you helped orchestrate something that could have destroyed thousands of people whose lives depend on that company. You and Charles did this. No, Adrian, don't say that, Vivian pleaded, voice broken. You don't understand how desperate things were, how much pressure I was under. Adrian stepped back, deliberately severing the last bridge between them. Pressure doesn't justify corruption. Tears streaked down Vivian's face, but even through her panic, the realization dawned on her, too late, that Astor and Crown was no longer a private room, but a stage. Nearly every table had a phone raised. Lights glowed from screens as the elite of the city recorded every moment. This wasn't a scandal in the making. This was a collapse, a very public one. Vivian tried to bolt. 1 second she was crying in her chair, the next she lunged toward the exit with desperate, trembling hands. But security, Astor and Crown's private, quiet, impeccably dressed security, stepped forward and blocked her path, not with aggression, but with calm professionalism. Miss LaRoche, one of them said lowly, please remain here. I'm not a criminal, she cried. Let me go. Let me go. The investigation will determine that, the guard replied. Phones recorded every second. Guests whispered, she's running. She must be guilty. I knew the LaRoche family was in trouble, but this is something else. Vivian's voice cracked. Adrian, please, tell them to let me leave. Tell them I'm not. But he didn't speak. He didn't defend her. He didn't soften. He simply watched her, as if seeing her for the true shape of her choices, for the consequences she never thought would arrive. Elena stepped toward Vivian then, not with cruelty, not with triumph, but with a calm, quiet clarity that made the room fall still again. Vivian flinched as if expecting another blow, only this time she was the one bracing for impact. But Elena stopped a careful distance away. Her voice was soft. Too soft for someone who had been publicly humiliated and physically attacked just minutes ago. You didn't destroy my life, Vivian. Vivian's breath stuttered. Don't lie to me. You hate me. You have to hate me. Elena shook her head once. No, she said. I don't hate you. You didn't ruin me. You didn't break me. You didn't bury me. Vivian stared at her, trembling. Elena continued. All you did was push the truth into the light. You didn't take anything from me. You only helped me return to the place I was meant to be. It was not a rebuke. It was a verdict. A gentle, devastating verdict. Vivian's face crumpled. She covered her mouth with both hands as a sob tore through her, small and helpless. Elena stepped back, giving her space. The entire room watched with a kind of reverent dread, witnessing not a punishment, but an unraveling. And then, Adrian's phone began to ring. A vibration first, then the sharp tone slicing through the tension. He glanced at the caller ID, Charles Rowan. Elena's eyes flickered, but she remained still. Adrian answered. Before he could speak, Charles's voice exploded through the speaker so loudly that nearby tables heard it. "What have you done?" The room froze again. "Adrian," Charles hissed, fury shaking every word. "Vivian called me. She told me you made a spectacle. This was supposed to be discreet. What do you think you're doing?" Adrian kept his voice calm. The truth came out. "You fool," Charles roared. "Do you know what you've unleashed? Do you know what this will cost? Get that girl out of there. Shut this down. Now!" Adrian did not look toward Vivian. He handed the phone to Elena. Vivian gasped. "No, no, don't. Adrian, please." But it was already in Elena's hand. The moment it touched her palm, the restaurant held its breath. Elena lifted the phone to her ear. "Hello, Uncle," she said. The entire room heard silence on the other end, a stunned silence that seemed to vibrate through the phone. Then, "Elena?" Charles whispered. "No, impossible. You can't—" She interrupted him gently. "We'll meet in court." "You don't know what you're saying," he snarled, fear lacing his rage. "You're making a mistake." "No," Elena replied. "I'm correcting one." Then she hung up. Not dramatically, not with anger, simply with finality. A quiet severing of the last thread tying her to the man who had stolen her life. Around her, people whispered in awe. She's not afraid of him. She's really a Rowan. This is history happening, right here. Adrian exhaled softly, as if realizing he had been holding his breath since the moment she touched the phone. Vivian collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably, not because of guilt, but because the world she'd constructed from secrets and promises had crumbled into dust in less than an hour. Elena stepped away from the center of the storm, the locket gleaming gently over her heart. For the first time in 15 years, she wasn't hiding. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't a shadow. She was Elena Rowan, and the world was finally seeing her. Astor and Crown had never been this quiet. Not on opening nights, not during celebrity galas, not even during winter blackouts when candles lit the room like an old cathedral. But now, silence wrapped the entire restaurant like a velvet shroud. Because Elena Rowan, dead to the world for 15 years, stood at the center of the storm she had just revealed. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't hiding. Not behind a borrowed name, not behind a service apron, not behind fear. She reached for the knot behind her waist and pulled. The black apron slipped off her like a skin she no longer needed. It fell onto the table with a soft, decisive sound, one that felt louder than the slap Vivian had given her earlier. The kind of sound that marked the end of one life and the beginning of another. When she straightened, her back was no longer curved from years of blending into walls. Her shoulders no longer folded inward to appear smaller. Her chin lifted just enough to reclaim the air around her. She stood not as Elena Shore, the quiet server, but as Elena Rowan. Adrian watched her with a quiet reverence, as if witnessing someone step through a doorway only she could see. "You're done hiding," he said softly. "Yes," she replied. "I am." He took one step closer, not encroaching, not crowding her, but aligning himself beside her in a way that signaled something final. He wasn't stepping away. "I'll go with you," Adrian said. "Wherever this leads, whatever Charles tries next, he will not touch you again." Elena studied him for a long moment. "You don't have to involve yourself in this," she said. "You owe me nothing." He gave her a look heavy with things left unspoken. "That's not true." She blinked. Adrian continued, voice low, almost breaking. "I owe Eleanor more than anyone knows. She trusted me with something I didn't understand at the time. She asked me to protect you if anything ever happened to her." A breath shuddered from him. "I failed her. I won't fail again." Elena didn't look away. The child in the airport terminal, the girl watching her mother walk away, the teenager who learned to disappear, all those versions of her were suddenly seen, fully, painfully, clearly. "She didn't die thinking you failed her," Elena whispered. "She believed in you." Adrian closed his eyes briefly, absorbing those words as though they were both a wound and a salve. Around them, patrons continued to watch from a respectful distance, some still recording, others too stunned to move. Even the waitstaff stood rooted to their spots, sensing the gravity of a moment that would be on the front page of every newspaper by morning. Adrian finally extended a hand toward her apron on the table, But Elena stopped him with a gentle touch to his wrist. "No," she said. "Leave it." He frowned. "Why?" "Because," Elena replied quietly, "I won't need it again." Her locket glimmered, catching the soft golden light overhead. Adrian followed the movement of her hand as she touched the silver pendant, this ancient symbol of a lineage that had been stolen from her. The Rowan crest felt warm beneath her fingertips, as if remembering her. Adrian inhaled slowly, the weight of realization settling over both of them. "You understand what happens next," he said. Elena nodded. "Yes. Charles will fight. He will try to destroy everything before he lets me take it back. He won't succeed. That's not guaranteed." Adrian turned fully toward her. "It is," he said firmly, "because he's not fighting you alone." A long breath escaped Elena's chest, a quiet, steadying exhale that felt like she was shedding the last remnants of the life she had endured, not chosen. She walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows at the edge of the restaurant. The glass spanned the entire wall like a portal to the world below. Tang 58. Far above the bustling streets, far above the noise and chaos and shadows she once lived in. The city stretched outward like a constellation, thousands of lights shimmering across the skyline, street lights glowing like faint stars, the river reflecting the night in broken silver ripples. Elena stood there, her reflection faint against the dark glass. Adrian joined her, close enough to feel her presence, far enough to let her breathe. For a long time, neither spoke. Because they didn't need words to understand the enormity of what was happening. This city, these lights, this empire of steel and glass and legacy, that she had been born into it, that he had helped build his life within it. And Charles Rowan had nearly handed it to ruin. Elena finally broke the silence. "My mother built a dynasty," she murmured. "A real one. Not the kind made only of money or power, but something meant to last, something meant to matter." Adrian's gaze followed hers out toward the skyline. "She believed in a future," he said quietly, "one she hoped her daughter would inherit." Elena's reflection hardened slightly. "And Charles tried to erase that future." Adrian's jaw clenched. "He won't succeed," he repeated. Elena's voice dropped to a steady, unshakable tone. "Because I'm back now." She turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his in the glass. "And I'm done being silent." Adrian's voice softened. "What do you want to do?" Elena faced the city fully. "Take back everything," she said. "Everything he stole, everything he twisted, everything he tried to bury with my mother." Adrian nodded once. "Then we start tonight." Elena nodded back. Her voice, when she spoke again, was almost a whisper, but it carried through the room like a promise written into stone. "I'm ready." Adrian held her gaze. "So am I." And together, heir and ally, they stood before the glowing city. Two silhouettes on the precipice of a war neither had chosen, but both were prepared to win. Because the Rowan heir had risen, and the empire was calling her home.